The echo of that scream still reverberates through the marble columns of the city's most exclusive shopping center. A cry that wasn't born of anger, but of pure desperation. A sound that made 500 people freeze in their tracks. That silenced the clicking of heels against polished floors. That killed conversations on crimson-painted lips. Please, do something. Those 5 words tore from the throat of Ricardo Montemeo, the man who had never asked for anything with please. The same man who bought apartments like others buy shoes. The same man who held the power to destroy careers with a single phone call. Now he stood there, his $3,000 suit wrinkled, his trembling hands stretched toward the heavens, pleading to a God he had never believed in. And in that moment of absolute chaos, when every witness had turned to pillars of salt, when security guards ran without purpose, when ambulances were still 10 minutes away, a figure moved from the shadows. Maria dos Santos, 52 years old, night shift janitor. The invisible woman who cleaned the glass that Ricardo smudged with his ring-laden fingers. The same woman he had never acknowledged with so much as a glance. The same woman who now walked toward him with the determination of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. What happened next defied every law of logic, probability, and human possibility. But before reaching that moment that changed the lives of everyone present, you need to know the complete story. You need to understand how 2 worlds so opposite can collide in a second and create a miracle. Stay until the end, because this story will make you believe in life's miracles. Subscribe now and ring the bell, so you won't miss any of these stories that prove the impossible is always just one act of kindness away. Ricardo Montemeo awakened each morning on the 42nd floor of Diamond Tower, with a view that encompassed the entire city as if it were his personal kingdom. His floor-to-ceiling windows reflected a 45-year-old man who had built an empire on the foundations of ruthless ambition and contempt for everything he deemed inferior. His morning routine was a ritual of absolute power. Colombian coffee at $500 per kilo, served on Italian porcelain by a housekeeper who dared not meet his eyes. Showers in a Carrara marble bathroom that cost more than what an average family earned in 5 years. Hand-tailored suits from Milan, crocodile leather shoes worth more than a new car. But what truly defined Ricardo wasn't his wealth, it was how he wielded it like a weapon. Every interaction was a demonstration of superiority. Every conversation an opportunity to remind the world who held real power. In his building's elevator, he completely ignored the woman who cleaned the floors. To him, she didn't exist. She was part of the furniture, as invisible as the lobby's decorative plants. When she whispered a timid "Good morning, Mr. Montemeo," he wouldn't even turn his head. His eyes remained fixed on his phone screen, reviewing numbers that represented more money than that woman would see in her entire lifetime. In his office, on the 35th floor of the financial district's most imposing building, Ricardo managed the destinies of thousands of employees with the same coldness he used to choose his ties. Mass layoffs were necessary restructuring. Salary cuts were human resource optimization. Human suffering was simply a statistic in his quarterly reports. His secretary, Elena Vasquez, a 30-year-old woman who had worked 60 hours weekly for the past 5 years to support her 2 young children, trembled every time she had to enter his office. Ricardo held the power to destroy her life with a simple signature, and both knew it. "Where's the quarterly sales report?" He would roar without lifting his eyes from his documents. Mr. Montemio, I emailed it to you 2 hours ago. Elena would respond in a barely audible voice. And why isn't it on my desk? Do you think I have time to hunt for emails? Is that what I pay your ridiculous salary for? Elena would lower her head, bite her lip to keep from crying, and run to print the document that was already perfectly organized in his inbox. She knew Ricardo had seen the email. She knew this was just another power game. But she also knew she needed that job more than she needed her dignity. On weekends, Ricardo frequented the Golden Plaza, the city's most exclusive shopping center. He didn't go out of necessity. His closets overflowed with clothes he never wore. He went for the sadistic pleasure of displaying his power before a captive audience. He entered like a Roman emperor visiting his domains. Luxury store managers greeted him with exaggerated bows. Salespeople stumbled over each other to serve him first. Other shoppers fell silent when he passed, as if his presence was so overwhelming it absorbed the ambient sound. But there was something Ricardo didn't know. In the darkest corners of that consumption temple, in the service corridors he would never see, in the employee restrooms where his French cologne had never reached, there existed an entire world that functioned to maintain his illusion of perfection. And in that invisible world lived Maria dos Santos, the woman destined to change his life forever. Maria dos Santos arrived at the Golden Plaza every night at 10 o'clock sharp. When the neon lights dimmed and golden brilliance gave way to silent shadows, her navy blue uniform, washed so many times it had lost its original color, contrasted with the designer dresses that had paraded through those same hallways just hours before. 52 years of life had carved deep lines into her brown face, but her eyes still held that spark of dignity that neither poverty nor racism had managed to extinguish. Her hands, roughened by decades of detergents and disinfectants, knew every corner of that shopping center better than the architects who had designed it. Maria lived in Villa Esperanza, a peripheral neighborhood where unfinished brick houses stacked upon each other like shoeboxes. Her home was a 2-room construction she shared with her daughter Carla, 25, and her granddaughter Sophia, 8. The tin roof leaked every time it rained, and in winter the cold crept through poorly sealed windows like an unwelcomed visitor. Each morning, after finishing her shift at the shopping center, Maria took 2 buses to reach home. The journey lasted an hour and a half, time she used to sleep against the window, while the city's sounds mixed with her dreams of a better life for her granddaughter. Her day truly began at 3 in the afternoon, when she awoke to prepare Sophia's lunch. The girl would arrive from school with bright eyes, loaded with questions and homework that Maria tried to help solve with her incomplete elementary education. Those moments at the worn wooden table were the most precious of her existence. "Grandma, why do you work when everyone sleeps?" Sophia would ask, while biting into a bologna sandwich. "Because someone has to keep the world clean so others can enjoy it." "My love," Maria would respond, stroking her granddaughter's black curls. "And because this way I can earn money for you to have everything you need to study and become someone important in life." But the truth was more complex and painful. Maria worked nights because it was the only shift she could get. Women like her, black, older, without formal education, only had access to the jobs nobody else wanted. The invisible jobs, the jobs done in silence, in darkness, far from the gazes of those who benefited from their effort. At the shopping center, Maria was a ghost. For 5 years she had cleaned every inch of marble, polished every piece of glass until it shone like a mirror, emptied every trash can, and disinfected every surface. She knew the secrets the wealthy left behind: tissues stained with hidden tears, anxiety pills forgotten in fitting rooms, whispered phone calls about unhappy marriages and dirty business. She had seen Riccardo Montemeur hundreds of times, always arriving on Saturday afternoons, always with the same arrogance, always treating everyone as if they were inferior beings. Maria had been a silent witness to his humiliation of employees, his screaming about services he considered deficient, his absolute disdain for anyone not at his economic level. Once, while Maria cleaned the windows of the shopping center's most exclusive jewelry store, Riccardo had entered shouting because the salesperson hadn't arrived exactly at the time he had demanded. The employee, a young man in his 20s studying nights to become an accountant, apologized repeatedly while Riccardo insulted him mercilessly. "You're incompetent. People like you shouldn't even work in a place like this. You should be cleaning bathrooms." Riccardo had screamed, unaware that his words pierced Maria's heart like poisoned daggers. But Maria hadn't felt anger. She had felt deep sadness for this man, who had all the money in the world but seemed completely devoid of soul. She had wondered what kind of pain could turn a human being into something so empty, so cruel, so desperately needy of proving his superiority. Maria's work nights were long and lonely. While her shift colleagues constantly complained about the damned rich and planned revenge they would never execute, Maria preferred silence. She played soft music through her cheap headphones and focused on her work as if it were meditation. Every movement of her cloth had purpose. Every surface she cleaned remained spotless, not from fear of being fired, but from personal pride. Maria deeply believed that it didn't matter what your job was. What mattered was doing it with dignity, with love, with the conviction that you were contributing to making the world a better place. Friday nights, after collecting her paycheck, Maria would stop in front of the shopping center's toy store window. She observed the giant stuffed animals, electronic games, dolls that cost more than her weekly salary. She dreamed of the day she could enter and buy Sophia everything she wanted, without having to look at prices, without having to choose between a new notebook and shoes that wouldn't be too small. But Maria had something Riccardo Montemeur had never possessed: faith. Not just religious faith, though she prayed every night before sleeping, but faith in humanity, faith that things could change, faith that her sacrifice would make sense someday, and that faith was about to be tested in the most extraordinary way imaginable. It was a Saturday afternoon when Riccardo Montemeur's world collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. The Golden Plaza buzzed with its usual activity: wealthy families strolling with shopping bags, executives closing deals in luxury cafes, private school teenagers spending their parents' credit cards without the slightest remorse. Riccardo had arrived at 3 in the afternoon with his usual routine: charcoal gray suit worth $5,000, Italian leather shoes that gleamed like black mirrors, Swiss watch that costs more than most people earned in a year. His imposing presence opened pathways through the crowd, as if he were Moses parting the Red Sea. He had entered the shopping center's most exclusive boutique, where the manager, a 40-year-old woman named Isabella, received him as if he were royalty. Riccardo didn't need clothes. His closet already overflowed with garments he wore once before, donating them to charities for tax benefits. But shopping was his way of demonstrating power, of reminding the world that he could have everything he wanted. "Mr. Montemeur, we have a new collection that arrived directly from Paris, Isabella said, with that artificial smile practiced in front of mirrors to please millionaire clients. These are exclusive pieces, unique in all of South America. Ricardo nodded with indifference, while Isabella showed him jackets that cost more than a teacher's annual salary. He selected garments at random, without even asking prices. Money was so abundant in his life that it had lost all meaning. It was like air, always there, invisible and inexhaustible. While paying with one of his black cards, with no credit limit, Ricardo felt a strange sensation in his chest. At first he ignored it, thinking it was business stress or perhaps the too strong coffee he had drunk at breakfast. But the sensation intensified, as if an invisible hand was squeezing his heart with growing force. "Are you feeling all right, Mr. Montemayor?" Isabella asked, noticing that color had begun to drain from her most important client's face. "I'm perfect," Ricardo lied, adjusting his tie with hands that were beginning to tremble imperceptibly. "I just need some fresh air." He left the boutique with steps that tried to maintain composure, but his body no longer obeyed him completely. The chest pain now spread to his left arm like a river of liquid fire. His legs, which had always carried him with a conqueror's confidence, began to fail him. Ricardo managed to reach the shopping center's central atrium, that open space where an Italian marble fountain created aquatic music under a crystal skylight that let in the afternoon's golden light. It was the heart of the shopping center, the place where all gazes converged, where he had always enjoyed being the center of attention. But this time, the attention he would receive wouldn't be what he had sought all his life. The pain intensified until it became unbearable. Ricardo felt as if an elephant had sat on his chest, as if his lungs had filled with liquid cement. His legs gave way, and he collapsed onto the polished marble floor that Maria dos Santos religiously cleaned every night. The sound of his body hitting the floor resonated throughout the atrium like a gunshot in a cathedral. Conversations stopped immediately. Heels ceased their clicking. Children stopped running. 500 people instantly became spectators of a theatrical performance that no one had bought tickets to see. Ricardo lay on the floor, his perfectly pressed suit now wrinkled and his impeccable hairstyle converted into a damp mess of cold sweat. His eyes, which had always looked at others with contempt, now looked upward, desperately seeking help in the faces peering down at him. "Call an ambulance," someone shouted from the crowd that was beginning to form. "Someone do something," exclaimed another. But no one moved. The same people who minutes before had run to please him, who had competed for his attention and money, now stood paralyzed by shock and fear. Ricardo Montemayor, the man who controlled financial empires, who moved millions with a simple phone call, who had believed he had power over others' life and death, was now completely vulnerable. His lips moved, trying to form words his closed throat couldn't pronounce. The pain was so intense it clouded his vision. For the first time in his adult life, Ricardo Montemayor felt real fear. Not fear of losing money or power, but primitive, animal fear of ceasing to exist. And then, when desperation reached its peak, when he realized that all his money couldn't buy him even one more second of life, when he understood he was completely alone, despite being surrounded by hundreds of people, Ricardo did something he had never done in his life. He asked for help. His voice emerged as a desperate roar that cut through the shopping center's silence like lightning. "Please, do something." The scream resonated among the marble columns, bounced off the shop windows, rose toward the skylight like a prayer born from the deepest terror. It was the cry of a man facing his own mortality, discovering that all his power was an illusion when life itself was at stake. Security guards ran in circles without knowing what to do. Store managers spoke into their radios with nervous voices. People took out their cell phones, not to call for help, but to record the spectacle of the powerful man's fall. And in that moment of absolute chaos, when it seemed no one had the knowledge or courage to act, a figure emerged from the service area shadows. Maria dos Santos, who had arrived early that afternoon to cover for a sick colleague's shift, had heard the scream that tore through the air. She didn't hesitate for a second. She didn't think about protocols, social differences, or the irony of the situation. She only saw a human being who needed help, and her most basic and noble instinct propelled her forward. What was about to happen would forever change the definition of the impossible. Maria dos Santos moved through the paralyzed crowd like an angel crossing through clouds. Her navy blue uniform, patched in several places and faded by countless washings, contrasted dramatically with the designer outfits surrounding her. But in that crucial moment, she was the only person in all of the Golden Plaza who knew exactly what to do. Her steps were firm and determined. She didn't run, didn't shout, didn't let herself be carried away by the panic that had infected everyone else. Decades of life had taught Maria that crises are faced with calm, with determination, with that serenity possessed only by those who have survived the fiercest storms. When she reached Ricardo, she knelt beside him without caring that her uniform would get dirty. Against the marble floor she herself had polished hundreds of times, her hands, rough from work but incredibly gentle, rested on the chest of the man who had ignored her for 5 years. "Stay calm," she whispered, with a voice that had the warmth of a maternal embrace. "I'm here. Everything is going to be all right." Ricardo looked at her with glassy eyes, not recognizing her, but immediately feeling something he hadn't experienced in decades, the presence of someone who truly cared about him. Not for his money, not for his connections, not for what he could do for them, but for him as a human being. Maria had learned first aid 20 years earlier, when her husband had suffered a work accident in construction. She had taken night classes at the local Red Cross, paying for every peso with sacrifice, because she knew that knowledge was the only thing no one could take from her. What had begun as a family necessity had become a silent passion, helping others when they needed it most. With precise and confident movements, Maria checked Ricardo's pulse. Her fingers found the irregular and accelerated rhythm that confirmed her suspicions: myocardial infarction. She had seen these symptoms before, knew that every second was crucial, knew that the difference between life and death would be measured in the next few minutes. "I need someone to call paramedics immediately," she shouted with an authority no one expected from the invisible woman. "And you," she pointed to a young man recording with his phone, "stop filming and help me loosen his tie and shirt." Her voice cut through the confusion like a hot knife through butter. For the first time in the Golden Plaza's history, wealthy shoppers obeyed orders from a cleaning lady. The tone of absolute command in her voice admitted no discussion. Maria positioned Ricardo's hands on his chest and began chest compressions with a surgeon's precision. Every movement was calculated, every pressure measured exactly to keep blood flowing to vital organs. Her training from 2 decades ago returned to her as if it had been yesterday. 1, 2, 3, 4. She counted quietly, maintaining the perfect rhythm she had practiced on plastic mannequins in poorly lit public hospital classrooms. 15, 16, 17, ... The crowd watched in absolute silence. 500 people held their breath, while a 52-year-old black woman, earning minimum wage, fought to save the life of the richest and most arrogant man they had known. The irony was so powerful, it seemed scripted by some celestial writer with an extraordinary sense of drama. Ricardo felt life returning to his body with each compression. The pain was still there, intense and terrifying, but now there was something more. Hope. Maria's hands transmitted an energy he'd never experienced, a force that had nothing to do with money or power, but with something much deeper and more primitive, unconditional love for human life. "Breathe with me," Maria whispered between compressions. "Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, Don't give up. Your family needs you. Life is beautiful and worth fighting for." Family? Ricardo had no real family. He had employees, partners, acquaintances, but no one who truly loved him. However, Maria's words resonated in some forgotten corner of his soul, awakening memories from a time before wealth, when he was still capable of feeling genuine love. Minutes stretched like hours. Maria didn't stop for a second. Her arms began to ache from constant effort, but she continued forward with a determination that defied all logic. It was as if she had made a secret pact with death. "You won't take this man. Not today. Not while I can do something to prevent it." At 3:30 in the afternoon, exactly 16 minutes after the collapse, Ricardo opened his eyes completely. His breathing had stabilized, his color had partially returned to normal, his pulse had found a more regular rhythm. The impossible had happened. A woman without formal medical education, using only her hands and heart, had managed to keep alive a man any doctor would have given up for, lost in those circumstances. At that moment, the paramedics finally arrived with their sophisticated equipment and professional protocols. But when they evaluated the situation, when they saw Ricardo's stable condition, when they realized what Maria had accomplished, their faces reflected something between amazement and deep respect. "Ma'am," the lead paramedic said, a 40-year-old man with 20 years of emergency experience, "what you did here. This is extraordinary. Without your intervention, this man would have died. There's no doubt about it." Maria rose slowly, her knees protesting after having remained kneeling so long on the hard floor. Her hands were stained with Ricardo's sweat and tears. Her uniform was wrinkled and dirty, but her face glowed with a serenity that no expensive cosmetic could replicate. And then something happened that no one in the Golden Plaza had ever witnessed. Ricardo Montemeo, the man who had never shown vulnerability, who had never acknowledged others' humanity, who had never said thank you for anything because he believed everything was owed to him, began to cry. Thick, silent tears rolled down his cheeks as he looked at Maria dos Santos, the invisible woman who had done the impossible through a simple act of pure humanity. The silence that followed was deeper than any noise. 500 people remained motionless, witnesses to something that defied their entire understanding of the world. The Golden Plaza, that temple of consumption and ostentation, had become the stage for a miracle that no amount of money could have purchased. Maria dos Santos straightened slowly, wiping her hands on her apron with that same naturalness with which she had saved a life. For her, what she had just done wasn't extraordinary. It was simply the right thing to do. It was what any decent person would have done in her place. It was what her grandmother had taught her decades ago in the dusty streets of her childhood, Milia. When someone needs help, it doesn't matter who they are, only that they're a human being like you. The paramedics now worked with professional efficiency, connecting monitors, administering oxygen, preparing Ricardo for transport to the hospital. But their eyes kept returning to Maria with a mixture of respect and curiosity. In their years of experience, they had seen doctors with decades of training make mistakes this humble woman had instinctively avoided. "Ma'am," the lead paramedic said while supervising Ricardo's transfer to the stretcher, "where did you learn to perform CPR with that precision? Your compressions were perfect, the exact rhythm, ideal depth. I've seen doctors with less technique than you." Maria smiled with that modesty that characterizes truly great people. "I took classes many years ago when my husband had an accident. I never thought I'd use them, but I always believed that knowledge to help others is sacred. You never know when God will put you in the right place at the right time." The crowd began to move, but no one really left. It was as if everyone had witnessed something so profound, so transformative, that they couldn't simply return to their lives as if nothing had happened. Conversations were reverent whispers, as if they were in a church after witnessing a miracle. Isabella, the boutique manager where Ricardo had been shopping, approached Maria with tears in her eyes. This woman who had spent her career flattering the rich and despising lower-ranking employees found herself face to face with a humanity lesson that left her speechless. I don't know what to say," Isabella murmured. "What you did, I wouldn't have known how. I stood paralyzed while you—" Maria placed a gentle hand on Isabella's shoulder. "Don't worry, ma'am. In moments like these, everyone reacts as they can. What's important is that the gentleman is well now." But Isabella couldn't accept such easy absolution. For the first time in years, she saw herself with brutal clarity. She remembered all the times she had treated cleaning employees like furniture, all the times she had ignored their humanity, all the times she had perpetuated the invisible caste system that governed the shopping center. Meanwhile, Ricardo remained conscious on the stretcher, his eyes fixed on Maria, while paramedics performed final checks before transport. His mind, traditionally occupied with numbers, strategies and power, was now completely focused on trying to process what he had just experienced. This woman had risked everything for him, without really knowing him, without knowing if he was good or bad, without caring about his money or status. She had placed her hands on his dying body and fought against death itself. And she had won. "Wait," Ricardo murmured with a voice still weak but clear. The paramedics stopped. I need to speak with her." Maria approached the stretcher, and for the first time in 5 years, Ricardo Montemia looked directly into her eyes. Not as an object, not as somewhat invisible, but as a human being, as the person who had given him back his life. "What's your name?" he asked with a voice broken by emotion. "Maria dos Santos, sir," she responded with the same quiet dignity she had shown throughout the entire crisis. "Maria Lettuce," Ricardo repeated, as if testing the sound of a new language. "Maria, you saved my life. You." The words stuck in his throat. How could he explain the enormity of what had happened? How could he express that in those crucial moments when his life hung by a thread? He had felt for the first time in decades the presence of unconditional love. "You don't owe me anything, sir," Maria said with a smile that illuminated her entire face. "I just did what I had to do. Any decent person would have done the same." But Ricardo knew that wasn't true. There were 500 people in that shopping center, and only one had acted. Only one had seen beyond social differences, beyond money, beyond the years of contempt he himself had sown. Only one had demonstrated that love for human life can overcome any barrier. As the stretcher moved toward the ambulance, Ricardo kept his eyes fixed on Maria until the shopping center doors closed between them. His last image was of that extraordinary woman, quietly returning to the shadows where she had lived for years, as if saving lives was just another task in her daily routine. The crowd finally began to disperse, but the conversations that followed were different from any social exchange that had occurred before in the Golden Plaza. There was no talk of shopping, brands, or status. There was talk of Maria, of what they had witnessed, of how an invisible woman had proven to be the most visible of all. In the days that followed, the video of what happened went viral on all social networks. But it wasn't an exploitative or sensationalist video. It was the record of a moment of pure humanity that touched millions of hearts around the world. The image of Maria kneeling next to Ricardo, saving his life with her own hands, became a symbol of hope in an era where social divisions seemed insurmountable. But for Maria, life continued the same. The next day, she returned to her night job as if nothing had happened. She cleaned the same floors, polished the same glass, emptied the same trash cans. Her supervisor, completely unaware of what had occurred the day before, scolded her for arriving 5 minutes late due to traffic. "Maria, this can't happen again," he told her with a stern tone. "You know punctuality is fundamental in this job." "Yes, sir," Maria responded simply, without mentioning that she had been at the hospital visiting the man whose life she had saved, without explaining that she had missed the bus because she had stayed talking with journalists who wanted to tell her story. For the outside world, Maria dos Santos had become a phenomenon. For herself, she remained simply a grandmother who worked nights to support her family and who had done what any decent person would have done in her place. But Ricardo Montemia had changed forever, and that change was about to shake the foundations of everything he had built during his life. Ricardo Montemeo remained 3 days in the intensive care unit of San Rafael Hospital, the city's most exclusive private medical center. His presidential suite had a garden view, private nurses around the clock, and all the luxuries money could buy. But for the first time in his life, material comfort provided him no solace. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Maria dos Santos's face. Not the face of an invisible employee, but the face of a guardian angel who had emerged from the shadows to save him when no one else had been able or willing to do so. Her rough hands, weathered by years of hard work, had been gentler than any caress he had received in his adult life. The doctors explained to him over and over what had happened. Massive myocardial infarction. Without Maria's immediate and perfectly executed intervention, he would have died in less than 5 minutes. The heart damage would have been irreversible. There was no doubt she had saved his life in the most literal way possible. But what the doctors couldn't explain was the change occurring in Ricardo's soul. It was as if Maria had not only restarted his physical heart, but had awakened something that had been sleeping for decades, his humanity. On his second day in the hospital, Ricardo did something he had never done: investigate the life of someone who couldn't provide him economic benefits. He hired a private investigator to tell him everything about Maria dos Santos, but not to find information he could use against her, as he had done so many times with business partners and competitors, but because he genuinely wanted to understand who this extraordinary woman was. The reports arrived that same afternoon and destroyed any vestige of the arrogance that had defined Ricardo's personality for years. Maria dos Santos, widowed for 10 years, since her husband died in a construction accident. Single mother raising her daughter, Carla, who worked double shifts as a supermarket cashier to pay for her nursing studies. Devoted grandmother to Sophia, an 8-year-old girl who dreamed of being a doctor to help people like my grandmother does. Monthly income, equivalent to what Ricardo spent on dinner at his favorite restaurant. Yet, Maria donated 10% of her salary to a local orphanage. She had informally adopted 3 street children, bringing them food every week and helping them with schoolwork. During weekends, she taught first aid for free at community centers in marginal neighborhoods. The irony was so overwhelming that Ricardo felt as if someone had given him a cosmic slap. He, with all his wealth, had lived a completely sterile life in terms of human contribution. Maria, with her material poverty, had touched more lives positively than he could achieve in 10 lifetimes. On his 3rd day in the hospital, Ricardo made a decision that would have been unthinkable a week before. He asked that Maria be brought to visit him, not as an employee being summoned by her boss, but as an honored guest he needed to see. Maria arrived after her work shift, still in her navy blue uniform, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from her house's garden. They weren't expensive roses or exotic orchids. They were small yellow flowers that grew freely in Villa Esperanza. But they had more genuine beauty than any floral arrangement that had adorned Ricardo's offices. "How are you feeling, Mr. Montemayor?" Maria asked with that genuine concern that characterized all her interactions. "Physically, I'm going to be fine," Ricardo responded, his voice still weak but clear. "But Maria Letters, may I call you Maria?" She nodded with a warm smile. "Maria, I need to tell you something. I should have said years ago. For 5 years you have cleaned the shopping center where I went every week. For 5 years you have been invisible to me. Not because you weren't there, but because I chose not to see you. And that blindness, that arrogance, made me something less than human." Maria listened in silence without judging, with that infinite patience she had developed through decades of being ignored, belittled, but never broken. "When you saved my life," Ricardo continued, "you didn't just give me more years to live. You gave me the opportunity to understand who I really am. And the truth is that, for 45 years, I've been a terrible man. I've hurt people. I've been cruel. I've used my power to cause harm. And you, who had every reason in the world to let me die after how I've treated you, saved me." Tears began rolling down Ricardo's cheeks, but this time they weren't tears of physical pain, but of a spiritual awakening that was simultaneously tearing apart and rebuilding his soul. "Why did you do it, Maria? Why did you save someone who had never shown you even a gram of respect?" Maria reflected for a moment before responding, choosing her words carefully. "Mr. Montemayor, I don't see rich or poor when someone is suffering. I only see a human being who needs help. My grandmother taught me that we all come from the same place and we all go to the same place. In between, the only thing that matters is how we treat others. You needed help, and I had the knowledge to give it to you. It was that simple. But after how I've treated you—" "People can change," Maria interrupted gently. "Even the hardest heart can soften if it finds the right reason. Maybe God put you in my path, not just so I could save you, but so you could save yourself." Those words resonated in Ricardo like cathedral bells. For the first time in decades, he felt something he had completely forgotten: hope. Not hope of earning more money or accumulating more power, but hope of redemption, of the possibility of using the time Maria had given back to him to repair at least part of the damage he had caused. "Maria," he said with a determination that surprised both of them, I want to do something for you. I want to compensate, even if only partially, for everything you've given without receiving anything in return." But Maria gently shook her head. "I don't need anything, Mr. Montemayor. I have everything I need. A family that loves me, honest work, and the satisfaction of knowing I helped save a life. But your granddaughter, Sophia Letters, I know she wants to be a doctor. I know you work day and night to give her an education. Let me help her. Let me pay for her studies, from school through university. Let me be part of making her dream come true." Maria looked at him for a long time, evaluating not just the offer, but the intentions behind it. "If you really want to do something good with your money," she said finally, "don't do it just for Sophia Letters. There are hundreds of children in my neighborhood who have the same dreams, but no opportunity. If you want to honor what happened between us, help all those children." And in that moment, Ricardo Montemayor understood the fundamental difference between him and Maria dos Santos. He thought in individual terms, in specific transactions. She thought in community terms, in lifting up everyone she could. He had used his power to concentrate wealth. She had used her knowledge to distribute hope. "I will," Ricardo promised, "but I need your help. I need you to teach me how to do it right, how to make sure it really reaches those who need it most." Maria smiled. And in that smile, Ricardo saw the beginning of a partnership that would change not only their lives, but the lives of hundreds of people in Villa Esperanza and beyond. "It would be an honor to work with you, Mr. Montemayor. But this time, we'll work as partners, as equals, as two people who want to make the world a better place." For the first time in his life, Ricardo Montemayor shook someone's hand without thinking about what he could gain from the transaction. He only thought about what they could accomplish together. 6 months after the day that changed their lives forever, Ricardo Montemayor and Maria dos Santos stood in the community center they had built together in Villa Esperanza. It wasn't a luxurious building like those Ricardo had erected in the financial district, but it had something none of his corporate towers had ever possessed: a soul. The Maria dos Santos Hope Center housed classrooms where hundreds of children received free education after school hours, a medical clinic that provided basic care to families who had never before been able to afford a doctor, and a computer lab where teenagers learned skills that would open doors their parents had never imagined. But more important than the facilities was what it represented: living proof that the impossible can happen when the most unexpected people decide to act. Ricardo had liquidated a significant portion of his investments to finance the project. His former partners considered him insane. His competitors saw him as easy prey. His financial advisors warned him about fiscal irresponsibility. But for the first time in his life, Ricardo didn't measure success in terms of monetary gains. Success was named Sophia dos Santos, who was now 9 years old and studied at the city's best private school, but who came to the community center every Saturday to teach younger children everything she had learned during the week. Success was named Carlos Mendoza, a 16-year-old who had been about to drop out of school to work in construction, but who now programmed mobile applications and dreamed of studying systems engineering. Success was named Elena Vasquez, his former secretary, who now directed the foundation that administered the community center. Ricardo had offered to triple her salary for her to be his right hand in this new venture, but she had accepted a more modest salary in exchange for something he had never offered her before: respect, autonomy, and the opportunity to make a real difference in the world. That afternoon, while watching Maria teach first aid to a group of young mothers, Ricardo reflected on the path he had traveled since that fateful Saturday at the Golden Plaza. His company continued to prosper, but now operated with completely different principles. Employees had humane schedules, dignified salaries, real growth opportunities. Suppliers were selected not only for their prices, but for their ethical labor practices. Not everything had been easy. Some important clients had distanced themselves when Ricardo refused to participate in deals he considered exploitative. Some investors had withdrawn their money when he implemented fairer salary policies. But for every door that closed in the ruthless corporate world he had known, new opportunities opened in a more conscious and sustainable business ecosystem. "What are you thinking about, Mr. Ricardo?" Maria asked, approaching after finishing her class. After 6 months, she still called him Mr. Ricardo. But now there was genuine affection in the treatment, as if it were a title of endearment rather than hierarchy. "I was thinking about how different we are now," Ricardo responded. 6 months ago, I was the most powerful person in any room I entered. Today, in this room full of children who come from the same neighborhood where you live, I'm probably the person who has the least to teach." Maria sat beside him on one of the wooden benches they had built with recycled material. "That's not true," she said with that quiet wisdom that characterized all her advice. "You've learned something that very few wealthy people ever learn, that real power doesn't come from what you can take from others, but from what you can give them." "But you always knew that," Ricardo replied. "You lived it every day, long before meeting me." "Maybe," Maria smiled, "but I never had the resources to help as many people as we can help now, working together. I had the heart, you had the means. God brought us together so we could do things that neither of us could have accomplished alone." At that moment, Sophia ran toward them with a drawing in her hands. It was a rudimentary but love-filled image. 2 adult figures surrounded by many small children, all smiling under a radiant sun. "Grandma Maria, Mr. Ricardo, look what I drew. It's you two helping all the neighborhood children." Ricardo took the drawing with hands that trembled slightly with emotion. In 45 years of life, he had received recognition from chambers of commerce, diplomas from prestigious universities, awards from business organizations. But none of those honors had meant even a fraction of what that drawing made by a 9-year-old girl with colored crayons meant. "It's beautiful, Sophia," he said with a broken voice. "May I keep it?" "Of course. It's for you, because you help all of us fulfill our dreams." While Sophia ran back to play with the other children, Ricardo looked at the drawing for a long time. There he was, represented not as a fearsome magnate or ruthless businessman, but as someone who helped, who protected, who gave instead of taking. "Maria," he said finally, "do you believe people can really change as radically as I have changed?" "I believe people always have the capacity to change," Maria responded, "but most never find the right reason or the right moment to do it. You were lucky to find both at the same time." "Lucky?" Ricardo laughed. "I almost died." "Almost," Maria emphasized. "But you didn't die. And everything that has happened since then has been your choice. No one forced you to come here. No one forced you to build this center. No one forced you to change the way you treat people. You chose to become the person you always had the capacity to be." As the sun set over Villa Esperanza, painting the sky in golden tones that rivaled any artwork that had adorned Ricardo's offices, the two friends watched dozens of children playing in the community center's courtyard. Children who now had opportunities their parents had never dreamed of. Children who would grow up knowing the world could be a more just place. Children who would someday pass those lessons on to their own children. Do you know what's the most extraordinary thing about all this? Ricardo murmured, more to himself than to Maria Letters. What? That the impossible only happened when someone decided to ignore all the reasons why it was impossible. You saved my life not because it was logical to do so, not because I deserved it, not because it would benefit you somehow. You did it because it was the right thing, period. And that simple act, that moment of pure humanity, changed everything. Maria nodded slowly. The impossible only happens when the invisible decide to act. For 5 years, I was invisible to you and almost everyone in that shopping center. But invisibility can be a strength, because it means you have nothing to lose by doing the right thing. And now look what we've accomplished, Ricardo said, pointing toward the center bustling with activity. Hundreds of children with new opportunities, dozens of families with access to medical care, an entire community that knows someone believes in their potential. But this is just the beginning, Maria added, with a smile that contained years of dreams finally made real. Imagine what we could achieve if more people understood that true power comes from lifting others up, not stepping on them. As they walked back toward the center's entrance, Ricardo reflected on the supreme irony of his transformation. He had spent decades accumulating power through fear, control, and manipulation. But real power, the power that truly changed lives, had come only when he learned to give it away freely. His phone buzzed with a text message from one of his former partners, offering him the opportunity to participate in a real estate development that would generate millions in profits but displace poor families from their homes. 6 months ago, he would have accepted without hesitation. Now, he deleted the message without even responding. "Everything all right?" Maria asked, noticing his expression. "Everything's perfect," Ricardo responded with a genuine smile. "Just my former life trying to tempt me to come back. But that person no longer exists. That person will always exist inside you," Maria corrected wisely. "The difference is that now you choose to be someone better every day. And that choice, renewed each morning, is what makes you the man you are now." As they said goodbye that night, Ricardo hugged Maria for the first time. It wasn't the superficial embrace of the social circles he had frequented for years, but the deep embrace of two people who had shared a miracle and decided to multiply it infinitely. "Thank you, Maria," he whispered, "not just for saving my life, but for teaching me how to live it. Thank you, Mr. Ricardo, for proving that it's never too late to become the person the world needs us to be." While driving back to his apartment that night, Ricardo passed by the Golden Plaza where everything had begun. The neon lights shone with the same intensity. Shoppers entered and exited with the same expressions of superficial satisfaction. The world of conspicuous consumption continued spinning as if nothing had changed. But for Ricardo, that place had become something sacred. Not for its luxury or ostentation, but because it was the place where he had learned that the greatest miracles often come wrapped in the humblest packages, that angels don't always have wings, and that the impossible is always just one act of kindness away. In his apartment, he hung Sophia's drawing on the wall, where his most prestigious MBA diploma had once been. It was a silent but powerful declaration about what he truly valued now. Before sleeping, Ricardo wrote in his personal journal, a habit he had adopted after the heart attack, Today, I understood something fundamental. It doesn't matter how much money you have, how much power you accumulate, or how many people fear you. At the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is whether you made the world a better place for at least one person. Maria taught me that the true success is measured not in what you receive, but in what you give. And the impossible, which I once thought required infinite resources, actually only requires a heart willing to act. As he fell asleep, Ricardo smiled, remembering the words Maria had said 6 months ago in the hospital: people can change. Now he was living proof of that truth. And in Villa Esperanza, in a small, unfinished brick house, Maria dos Santos knelt beside her granddaughter's bed to listen to her nighttime prayers. "Grandma," Sophia whispered, "is it true that you've saved Mr. Ricardo's life?" "Yes, my love," Maria responded, stroking the girl's black curls. "And now he helps us and all the children in the neighborhood." "That's right." "Then it was like a miracle, wasn't it? Like in the stories you tell me from the Bible?" Maria reflected for a moment before responding. "Miracles happen every day, Sophia Letters, but most people are too busy to notice them. The real miracle wasn't that I saved Mr. Ricardo. The real miracle was that he decided to change his heart after I saved his body. Do you think I'll be able to perform miracles when I grow up?" "My love," Maria smiled, kissing her granddaughter's forehead, "you're already doing them. Every time you're kind to someone who's sad, every time you help a classmate with homework, every time you share your lunch with someone who's hungry, you're performing a small miracle. And small miracles, when they come together, become big miracles. Like what happened with Mr. Ricardo. Exactly like what happened with Mr. Ricardo." As Sophia fell asleep, Maria looked out the window toward the distant lights of downtown where Ricardo lived. Two worlds that had seemed completely separate were now united by something stronger than any social or economic barrier: the understanding that all human beings have the capacity to redeem themselves, to change, to become instruments of hope for others. The story that had begun with a desperate scream in a luxury shopping center now multiplied into hundreds of small stories of hope in Villa Esperanza. Children who dreamed of futures that had been impossible before. Mothers who learned skills that would allow them to support their families with dignity. Fathers who saw real opportunities for their children for the first time in their lives. And it had all started with an invisible woman who decided to do the impossible: save the life of someone who had never shown her respect, simply because it was the right thing to do. The most powerful lesson of this story isn't that money can solve all problems, nor that rich people are evil and poor people are saints. The lesson is much deeper and more universal. That true transformation always begins with an act of pure humanity, without expectations of reward, without calculations of benefit, without consideration of social status. Maria dos Santos didn't save Ricardo Montemar to become a symbol of hope. She saved him because she saw a human being who needed help, and she had the ability to provide it. That simplicity, that purity of intention, was what made the impossible possible. Ricardo didn't change because someone forced or manipulated him. He changed because he experienced, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, unconditional love. And that love transformed him in a way that no amount of therapy, coaching, or advice could have achieved. Today, years after that Saturday that changed everything, the Maria dos Santos's Hope Center has expanded to 5 different neighborhoods. Hundreds of children have received university scholarships. Dozens of small entrepreneurs have received microloans to start dignified businesses. Entire families have escaped extreme poverty, not through condescending charity, but through real and sustainable opportunities. But the deepest impact isn't measured in statistics or beneficiary numbers. It's measured in the paradigm shift it has inspired in hundreds of thousands of people who have heard this story. It's measured in the acts of kindness that multiply when people understand that we all have the power to do the impossible, no matter how invisible or insignificant we feel. Elena Vasquez, Ricardo's former secretary, now directs similar programs in 3 Latin American countries. Every time she inaugurates a new center, she tells the story of how a black cleaning woman changed the heart of the most arrogant man she had known, and how that change had multiplied to touch thousands of lives. Isabella, the boutique manager who had witnessed the miracle, quit her job in the luxury fashion world to become a social worker. She now helps women victims of domestic violence rebuild their lives. Inspired by the example of dignity Maria had demonstrated in the most difficult moments, the paramedics who had arrived that afternoon at the Golden Plaza incorporated the story into their training programs. They used it to teach that first aid isn't just medical techniques, but acts of love for human life that anyone can learn and apply. Even the supervisor who had scolded Maria for arriving 5 minutes late the day after saving her life eventually learned what had occurred. He showed up at Villa Esperanza to personally ask for forgiveness, and now donates part of his salary to the community center. The story had gone viral, not for sensationalism or cheap drama, but because it touched something fundamental in the human heart, the need to believe that goodness can triumph over cruelty, that humility can transform arrogance, that the invisible can become the most powerful of all. Sophia, now a brilliant 15-year-old, had founded a club at her private school called the Visible Invisibles. Wealthy students worked as volunteers in public hospitals, nursing homes, and community centers, learning from a young age that privilege comes with the responsibility to lift others up. "My grandmother taught me that we're all invisible to someone," Sophia explained in a TEDx talk that went viral with millions of views. "But we also all have the power to make others' humanity visible." The day my grandmother saved Mr. Ricardo, she didn't just save a life. She saved the possibility that the world could be a better place. Maria, now 58 years old, no longer worked as a janitor. She had become the Community Impact Director of the Montemordos Santos Foundation, a title that sounded fancy, but in practice meant she continued doing what she had always done, helping people who needed it most, only now with infinitely greater resources. But despite all the recognition, interviews, and awards she had received, Maria remained fundamentally the same person. She lived in the same house in Villa Esperanza because she didn't want to distance herself from the community that had shaped her. She wore simple clothes because she believed elegance came from the soul, not the wardrobe. And every night, before sleeping, she gave thanks for the opportunity to have been in the right place at the right time to change her life, and in the process, change her own. Ricardo, for his part, had discovered that real philanthropy didn't consist of writing checks to ease one's conscience, but in personally committing to the change he wanted to see in the world. He spent 3 days a week working directly in the community centers, not as a distant benefactor, but as another volunteer who cleaned, taught, and learnt at the same time. His company had evolved to become a model of conscious capitalism, where profits were reinvested in social programs and employees were treated as integral human beings, not expendable resources. He had proven it was possible to be financially successful without sacrificing humanity in the process. Saturday afternoons, Ricardo still visited the Golden Plaza, but now for completely different reasons. He went to remember who he had been, and to renew his commitment to who he had decided to be. He would sit in the same place where he had collapsed 6 years ago, where Maria had saved him, and reflect on the continuing miracle of human transformation. Sometimes tourists or journalists recognized him and asked him to tell the story. Ricardo always agreed, but always ended his accounts with the same reflection. People tell me I'm an example of redemption, but they're wrong. Maria dos Santos is the example. I was simply lucky to be there when she decided to demonstrate what it means to be truly human. Everything I've done since then has been trying to live up to the unconditional love she showed me in the most vulnerable moment of my life. On one of those Saturdays, while sitting in the atrium where everything had begun, a young woman in a cleaning uniform approached him. She was new, obviously nervous, and apologized repeatedly for interrupting him. "Mr. Montemio," she said with a timid voice, "my supervisor told me you're an important person, but I wanted to ask you, is the story they tell about Mrs. Maria true? Is it true that she'd saved you right here?" Ricardo smiled, recognizing in that young worker the same type of dignified invisibility that had characterized Maria for years. "It's completely true," he responded. "What's your name?" "Carmen, sir. Carmen Ruiz. Carmen, may I give you some advice? Never let anyone make you feel invisible. You have infinite value, regardless of your job or social status. And if someone ever needs help, and you have the ability to provide it, don't hesitate for a second. You could be saving more than a life. You could be saving a soul." Carmen walked away with a smile that illuminated her entire face, carrying with her not just advice, but confirmation that her work had dignity and that she had the power to change the world, one act of kindness at a time. That night, when Ricardo arrived home, he found a voice message from Maria Letters. Her voice, always warm and serene, filled the apartment like an audible embrace. "Mr. Ricardo, I'm watching the news about the new center we opened in Guatemala. 500 more children with opportunities they didn't have yesterday. I'm so proud of everything we've accomplished together. But above all, I'm proud of the man you've become. Tomorrow, I'm going to teach first aid to a group of teenagers at the new center. Would you like to join me? I think they'd love to hear the story of how miracles can happen when we least expect them." Ricardo closed his eyes and for a moment transported himself back to that Saturday 6 years ago. He could feel the cold marble against his back, the pain piercing his chest, the sensation that the world was fading around him. And then Maria's hands, gentle but firm, bringing him back to life. But now he understood that what Maria had done wasn't just cardiopulmonary resuscitation. It was spiritual resurrection. She had taken a man who was dead inside and given him back not just his heartbeat, but the capacity to love, to give, to be truly human. The next day, while heading toward Villa Esperanza to meet Maria, Ricardo stopped by the cemetery where her husband was buried. He paused in front of the modest grave, marked only with a wooden cross and a plaque that read, "José dos Santos, husband, father, good man." "José," Ricardo murmured, feeling slightly foolish for talking to a grave, but needing to express what he carried in his heart. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I wanted to thank you. I know you were the one who taught Maria about unconditional love, about helping others without expecting anything in return. What she learned from you, she taught me. And now we're passing those lessons on to hundreds more people. Your legacy lives on, keeps multiplying, keeps changing the world, one life at a time. A gentle breeze moved the leaves of the tree under which the grave lay. And Ricardo chose to interpret that as a response, as a blessing, as confirmation that what they were doing had the support of forces greater than themselves. When he arrived at the community center, he found Maria surrounded by 20 teenagers, all with the same expressions of intense concentration he had seen in medical students at prestigious universities. But these young people came from the city's toughest streets, and for them, learning to save lives wasn't an academic requirement, but a tool for survival and empowerment. The most important thing, Maria was saying while demonstrating compressions on a mannequin, isn't perfect technique. It's the willingness to act when others freeze. It's the decision not to give up, no matter how impossible the situation seems. One of the teenagers, a 16-year-old boy with scars on his arms that told stories of a life too hard for his age, raised his hand. "Mrs. Maria, is it true that you saved a millionaire who had never treated you well?" Maria looked toward the door where Ricardo stood, and her eyes lit up with that genuine joy she always showed when she saw him. "It's true," she responded, "but what really matters isn't that he was a millionaire, or that he hadn't treated me well before. What matters is that he was a human being who needed help, and I had the knowledge to help him. Money doesn't matter when someone is dying. The past doesn't matter when someone needs salvation. Only what you decide to do in that moment matters." "But ma'am," another young person insisted, "didn't you feel angry? Didn't you want to leave him there for all the bad things he had done?" "Anger is poison you take, hoping it will poison someone else," Maria responded, with that wisdom acquired through decades of experience. "I decided long ago not to poison myself with anger. When you see someone suffering, you only have two options: help or don't help. I will always choose to help, because that's the person I want to be." Ricardo quietly entered the classroom and sat in the back, listening to Maria teach not just first aid techniques, but life lessons worth more than any formal education. After class, while the young people practiced in pairs, Maria Letters approached Ricardo. "What did you think of the class?" she asked. "It reminded me why I fell in love with the person you are," Ricardo responded. "You have the gift of teaching not just with words, but with the example of how you've lived your life." "We all have that gift," Maria replied. "The difference is that some of us decide to use it and others don't." At the end of the day, while driving back to their respective homes, Ricardo asked Maria a question he had been considering for months. "Do you think we've done enough? Do you think we've honored what happened between us 6 years ago?" Maria reflected for a long time before responding. "Mr. Ricardo, I believe what happened 6 years ago wasn't the end of something, but the beginning. Every life we touch, every person we help, every child who receives an opportunity, is an extension of that moment. It's not about doing enough. It's about continuing to do while we have the capacity to do it. And when we no longer have that capacity, then we will have taught others to continue." Sophia, today's young people, everyone who has been touched by this story, they will continue multiplying the miracle long after we're no longer here. That night, Ricardo wrote the longest entry in his journal since he had begun the practice. "Today, I understood that Maria didn't just save my life 6 years ago. She taught me how to live it. And now I see that my purpose isn't just to be different from who I was before, but to be an instrument for others to discover their own capacity for transformation. Every center we open, every scholarship we grant, every life we touch, is a seed that will grow in ways we can never fully imagine. The real miracle wasn't that my heart beat again. The real miracle was that I learned to use that heart to love, and that love, multiplied in hundreds of lives, will keep growing long after Maria and I have completed our time on this earth. The impossible does happen. It happens every time someone decides to be better than they were yesterday. It happens every time the invisible decides to act. It happens every time love triumphs over fear, goodness over cruelty, hope over despair. And it will happen tomorrow, and the day after, and every day to come, because we have planted seeds that know no seasons of rest. 10 years after that Saturday that changed the world of 2 people and, by extension, the world of thousands more, the story of Maria dos Santos and Ricardo Montemor had become urban legend, modern parable, living proof that everyday miracles are possible when hearts open to the possibility of redemption. The Maria dos Santos's Hope Center had multiplied across 17 countries. The Montemor dos Santos's Foundation had granted university scholarships to more than 5,000 students. But more important than any statistic was the cultural change they had inspired, an entire generation that had grown up understanding that true power comes from lifting others up, not stepping on them. Sofia dos Santos, now a medical student at the country's most prestigious university, always carried a wrinkled photo in her pocket, her grandmother Maria kneeling on the golden plaza marble, saving Ricardo Montemor's life. It was her daily reminder that the greatest miracles often come in the humblest packages. And every time someone asked why she had chosen medicine, Sophia responded with the words her grandmother had taught her since she was small. Because when you have the knowledge to save lives, using it isn't an option, it's a sacred responsibility. The story continued multiplying, inspiring acts of kindness in places as far away as Tokyo and as close as the street corner. Because in the end, that's the true nature of miracles. They never end. They only transform and extend, touching hearts that will touch other hearts, creating infinite waves of hope in a world that desperately needs to believe the impossible is still possible. If this story touched your heart, share it now with someone who needs to believe in everyday miracles. Because maybe you're the invisible person destined to do the impossible for someone else. Maybe your moment to change the world is just around the corner, waiting only for you to decide to act when others freeze. Subscribe to the channel and leave your comment. Do you believe the simplest people can change the world? Have you witnessed an everyday miracle? Are you ready to become the instrument of transformation someone else needs? Remember, the impossible only happens when the invisible decide to act. And all of us, at some point in our lives, are invisible to someone. The question isn't whether you have the power to do the impossible. The question is whether you're willing to use it when your moment comes. Because in the end, we all have the capacity to be the miracle someone else is waiting for.